I'm here with Jim Dowling. He's a consultant and trainer who was most recently with Citigroup. And he and I have spoken a number of times. He's a huge Flying Logic fan. And I just wanted to introduce my audience to him and kind of, help everybody get to know him a little bit better and talk about Flying Logic, their constraints, and just thinking better in general. So, Jim, tell us just about, your background and, a little bit about your career path.
Sure. So thanks, Wolf, for having me here. I was first introduced to theory of constraints, TOC, back in 2003, 2006, when I was actually in the military. Prior to working at Citi and embarking in that civilian lifestyle, I had a life before where I was in the Navy. I served 20 years and retired. But during that time, something that I was exposed to was theory of constraints, as well as the Lean and Six Sigma models. And what really sold me in it was the ability that they listened to the people on the floor. They actually came down and asked the people, what is it that we could do to make your job better? We told them, and they went back and actually executed on it. And I thought that that was really great, is that is the empowerment that we were looking for in the people, is to help them. And then so that is what jived me and really got me enthralled in it and wanted to continue on with it, because I saw my fellow shipmates and sailors and teammates or whatever struggling with things. And I felt, wow, here's a way that we can fix this and do it. And it's not just back of napkin kind of solutions. These are actual real solutions that people can get behind and stand behind. And a big problem that we had in the military was the fact that everybody changes out every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's always coming in with new ideas, or this is the way we did it before kind of thing. And there was never anything set in stone, or at least nothing to fall back on those procedures. Everybody went back to just the way they used to do things. And so what we did is we were able to change that perspective and that pulse there by giving them the information, leaving behind that documentation, working as a team to build it, and then moving forward. So that was where I was first exposed to it, and I caught the bug because it wasn't about the problem that we were trying to solve. It was about the system and trying to make it better and get the product out there for our customer. And so it wasn't just a matter of fixing the one thing that was in front of me or the engine that I was trying to rebuild. It was really understanding the overall, okay, now what?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay, I fixed the engine, now what? Where does it go? Right? And what are we doing? And I think that having that really helped me moving forward.
And so you were actually doing something like working with mechanical devices and so on, and just kind of doing things the way things have been done. And they brought these people in who really started analyzing the situation, and you saw the improvement they helped bring, that they actually made change, and then that inspired you to understand it better yourself, understand that process yourself. Is that correct?
Correct. I knew it was good because when we first implemented it, it was for the aircraft engine maintenance facility, for a complete second degree maintenance that we would do on it. We went from an 82-day turnaround time to an 8-day turnaround time.
Wow.
And then ultimately we got it down to 3 days. And the reason why is because we looked at it and we realized that we were just, the way we were doing work was just to do work. People felt like, okay, we come in, we're here to do work. So everybody get building engines and doing work. And in reality, we didn't need to, because we were over processing. We were making too many engines. We were leaving them sit in a pool that would never get exhausted. And we were spending money like it didn't matter. And so once we went ahead and did that and changed, I knew it was a good thing because everybody came to see it, right? We had the chief of naval operations came in. I gave him a tour and I explained everything to him. They thought it was great. There were other admirals that all came in, and master chiefs of the Navy and stuff like that came in. So we understood that it was a good thing, but it just didn't. I guess when I transitioned out of there, then I didn't see it in other places, and I was trying to replicate it in other places. That type of work in the military. And so ever since then, I've kind of had that bug. I got out, I worked with some people, they were interested in it, but it was kind of a Lean Six Sigma civilian world that I was in. I couldn't find a theory of constraints kind of a world that people were wanting to work in or take the time to understand it. The exposure I had was a lot of, this is what McKinsey told us. This is what the other Deutsche Bank or somebody else that somebody got from another bank or another business, that type of a thing. So it was very interesting to see that while TOC really worked is in conjunction with Lean and Six Sigma, nobody was using it. No, people were not aware of it, and so to me, I feel like that's kind of an advantage that I have, is that I come from a different background, not college, consulting, that whole thing. I come from military, boots on the ground, seeing and making changes to then be able to share that and kind of, so
That's awesome.
I mean,
yeah. I mean, so obviously you've had some training and so on, and also Lean and Six Sigma, right?
Yes, sir.
So
Yes,
my understanding.
I did.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I trained with AGI, the Allied Gold Group Institute, way back when they were first starting out with Novasis. So I did my green belt, black belt. I did some Jonah training with them as well, with TOC supply chain. So it was really exciting to be in that world of change, to get out of the way we've always done things and kind of being on that front to make those changes that go forward. And just a side note, I've been back to North Island since, and they're still able to produce engines every 3 days.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So that's a
so
that's
my
a win in itself.
My understanding, because I'm more about TOC than Lean and Six Sigma, but my understanding is Lean is basically about reducing waste, and Six Sigma is about reducing defects, whereas TOC is about managing the bottleneck, which is what really makes the difference in terms of your throughput, how the rate at which you achieve your goal. In your case, your goal was to produce engines or fix engines or whatever you're doing with your.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and so. Were you already using kind of Lean Six Sigma, or did they all come in at once, Lean Six Sigma and TOC?
No, actually, it all came at one time, because the military felt, as with anything, if we're going to give it to you, we're going to give you a fire hose, right? So they gave everything, and the amazing thing is, before all that came along, we used to you have 5 engines tore down and all different parts are coming in. So we used to rob from Peter to pay Paul. We would cannibalize parts from one engine to another, just moving them around to make an engine, right? So again, we were working on a push system, and we didn't even know it. And because the customer demand was not driving what we did. It was just, hey, you're here today, fix engines. So
were you able to tease apart the kind of effect that each of these 3 systems kind of had on your overall productivity, and kind of measure them separately, or was it more like a scattergun approach? And
we were able to see it. We were able to take the first thing we did is really mapped out our current state and said, well, what are we doing? And then looked at it and said, what are we doing? And then what do we need to do? And then it's like, okay, well, we identified the bottlenecks in the system, and then from those bottlenecks, then you're right, we used the Lean methodology to go through it and identify what is the waste, what are we doing, what kind of paperwork are we filling out, how many trips are we making here and there to do these types of work. What is the shop set up in a flow? Is there any type of a flow to the work? Are they in a cell concept? That wasn't anything that was there. We had 7 toolboxes that were the same. So they were all the same. But only 2 of the 7 had torque wrenches. So you can imagine
that's not the same.
Yeah, right. So you can imagine trying to build an engine, and then when you have to use a torque wrench, you have to go borrow it from the one toolbox. But we got so entrained that no one made the effort to change it. It was
Right.
just like, well, that's just the way it is.
Mm.
So I felt that it was really empowering. So back to your question, was we use the TOC to identify the bottleneck in the whole system, not just the process. Then we use lean to lean out the system, get rid of the waste, use all the tools there. And then from there, the Six Sigma part was more about understanding the repeatability and the reproducibility that we could achieve with that engine maintenance time. Are we matching it? Are we not? So we worked through a based on the turnaround time, the TRR, time to reliably replenish the parts versus what comes in and what goes out. We changed our whole methodology to allow the customer demand to drive us, not just the fact that we come into work and we're here to produce every day.
So, so yeah, I mean, so it sounds like, one of your first experiences with all this was a great case study in how TOC, Lean, and Six Sigma can actually work together and actually strengthen each other, and how it's not just a matter of one size fits all or there's a panacea, but by applying these several techniques judiciously, you actually create a much greater impact.
In a much shorter amount of time as well, because you've already, when you do it, by the time you're looking at the lean stuff, you've already identified the core critical root cause to your problems, right? And then but until you do that, all you're doing is just hitting, you're just playing whack-a-mole and what somebody feels is the most important thing in their system. So I was blessed in the fact that in the military, they identified it as a complex system, not just complicated. They identified it as what it was, and we looked at it for what it was. I felt that there was one team working together to get to that common goal, and everybody that was part of it was just a piece of that system and trying to do that. So I felt that in the military. Fast forward to civilian world, and I feel like everybody was just in their place doing their job. And when you were to look up and out and go, wait a minute, what's going, it was no, look back down and just keep doing what's in front of you. And I didn't feel that there was that listening of, hey, here's a different way of looking at things and so on and so forth. It was kind of, no, this is the way we do it. We just keep moving forward like this. So I felt that was something that I had noticed in the civilian world. Not to be jumping all around. So
no, that's fine. That's fine. I'm not again, I know a lot less about Lean Six Sigma and their application in TSC, but when I think of Lean and Six Sigma, I think of checklists and kind of metrics that you're supposed to measure and then and control for. When I think of TOC, I think, since I'm a very visual thinker, I think of these diagrams, things like goal tree, current reality tree, future reality tree, evaporating cloud, and that's what kind of initially attracted to me to it, because I'm a visual thinker, and so what was your first kind of encounter with kind of the kinds of trees, the kinds of diagrams and so on that TOC involves, and how did you kind of execute those at that time?
I was first introduced to it, TOC, at a higher level, and understanding the trees and stuff when we were first introduced to it in the military. So it was really about, it was really understanding the current state of operations. They didn't have so much of a goal tree at that time, because again, their thinking was, we have to look at this in a system, in a systemic way. So how do we do that? And it was looking at it through that lens of TOC, and just getting that down to identify, exploit, obtain, or I can't remember off the top of my head.
Right. Yeah.
But it was just, it was a matter of going through that and identifying what that is. That we didn't do too much of the future state. Well, future state was a lot of, it was a lot of on the wall stickies and stuff like that, because there was no flying logic at the time.
Right.
So, or at least that we didn't know about in TOD. And so it was a lot of on the wall stickies, high level, these are the sections, breaking it down into basically the beginning, middle, and end
Mm-hmm.
of of the of the process, and then what goes on, and identifying the turnaround times and things like that. Um, and then doing that, that helped us understand what we wanted we were able to identify where are the problems or the current state, and then what is it we're trying to get to, and then looking at and saying, okay, what's the gap between where we are now and where that is, and kind of identifying what are the order of things in which we need to fix, right? Because you can't fix everything at the same time. So it's a matter of which one do you optimize and then move on from there. And I think that allowing people to see that on the walls and that visual is what every time I do a class or any time of that is always the wow factor. People don't realize how mind
Right.
blowing and how much stuff goes into their process, or at least their daily work or whatever it is, and how many decisions are involved with that. And I think that, that was some of the first exposure that I had to it. But in doing that, the hard part was, I guess. So now I'm gonna kind of switch gears here a little bit. I'm
Sure.
thinking,
Yeah.
so in the military we didn't have it, right? So then I was exposed to that all on the walls and everything. So now fast forward, all right? I apologize if I'm jumping around here, but fast forward on this is I got into the job that I was at Citi, and I was looking and I was saying, okay, how do we do this better? What's a different way of doing this? Right? Because right now all we're doing is we're doing a lot of PowerPoint presentations and Excel spreadsheets, looking at customer complaints and like figuring out what a customer's complaining about and then trying to solve that. Right. So you're in a complex system and you're trying to solve something that already happened. So we were in a fixing. So we weren't doing preventative. We were trying to fix something that already happened in the past versus trying to prevent it in the future. Right. So, so we were doing a lot of that. So I was trying to figure out how do we do that. And then I came upon flying logic, and I had known of this in the background. I had seen it before, but then over time I thought, okay, they don't have it here. We need something like this. And so what I did is I did all the paperwork, all the hard lifting to get it added, to get Flying Logic added to the software catalog at Citi. And then in doing that, I was able to just go ahead and do my own process, looking at the complaints that we had, where they were falling, that type of thing. Even taking a mission statement, a PowerPoint mission statement, and building it into a goal tree to say, this is the goal of the company and 3 things and so on and so forth. It was mind blowing to see it in a different perspective, because I felt that not only does Flying Logic allow you to visually see it, but it also allows it to be interpreted so quickly by anybody else that reads it that they can go, yep, I agree with that, or no, I want to add this. So say, okay, it helps get everybody on the same page a lot quicker to what's going on.
And that's one of the beauties of TOC I've always loved, is that, Ellie Goldrat always pointed out that there's one reality. We all ought to be able to agree on this reality. And, by thinking through chains of cause and effect, we can all agree that, yes, this is the system we're involved in. And so if we make a change to it, we can agree the outcome of that change is going to be. And so getting everybody on the same page is one, and making that as frictionless as possible was one of my major goals with creating Flying Logic as a tool that supports those processes. So it sounds like that, you were able to work with a number of people at Citi who it might have seemed strange to them at first, but then they had their minds blown. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yeah, they did. But it was just a matter of, unfortunately, trying to get somebody to assist and to bridge that, to be able to find that connection, unfortunately, in such a large organization. Something I noticed, I think there's a lot of cost accounting going on instead of throughput accounting.
Right.
And what I mean by that is look, I'm not a technical guy. I can't write the code. I can't, not to say that I don't want to learn, you know what I mean? Because that's the thing. It's like, okay, nobody else is going to do it for you. So you got to figure out how to do it. So I've been trying to, but at the same time, it's like trying to leverage resources that are in the business to assist. And that was very hard to find those people, especially in the unfortunate world that we've been living in, where we've been COVID and hybrid, and, you know, you only know who you know. And where I was going with the cost is like, in order to get anybody to work on anything and to like even experiment and think about anything, it's like there had to be a job assigned to it, because all these people had to account for all their hours and what they were working on and so on and so forth. Like everything was towards a project or this and that. And
Now,
it's just
as I recall, you were looking for some Python scripting, because Flying Logic has a built-in Python scripting engine that lets you kind of automate it, and you wanted to like import user complaints into it and kind of diagram them out based on your database in an automated way. But that was what I think you're talking about, you know, struggling to find somebody inside Citi
Yes.
who was available to help with that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. You know, the space I was working in, again, we were looking at the complaints after they happened, and then we would log the information into Jira, and then a ticket would be open and so on and so forth. And I thought about it. I was like, well, wait a minute. We're identifying what domain or what journey they were in and what sub journey and so on and so forth that these people are making this complaint in. So why not just map it to it, you know? And then looking at that, you can then use some just some words instead of numbers. And that was the big thing. Couldn't get people off of numbers. They were looking at percentages and this and that. And I'm like, I hear what you're saying, but what is that? You know,
Yep.
Is that sometimes, all the time, once in a while, so on and so forth? I think so you should put words to it so that it makes sense, so you can tell a story of what your customer is experiencing through this journey. And that's where I was trying to get to, unfortunately, before my untimely departure.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to go to on that, but you know, I mean, obviously, you know, it was great that the Citi Group had people like you in it to kind of help with these things. Were you ever able to actually get to the point where you had any of these things automated as like a proof of concept or anything like that, or did it just kind of was it an idea that never really got to launch?
I did. We had it as it didn't launch per se as in a firm-wide thing, but I was able to get a hold of a guy who out of North Carolina who helped me out. He found it very interesting to do this stuff because he was a coder and he understood it as well. I found a couple other, you know, interns who were just coming into the business, and so they thought it was kind of neat to be able to do it, because they told me that what they were working on with me gave them the most satisfaction, because they could see what they were working on, and they could see the results of what it was that we were doing, where they weren't just like QAing code or something like that, you know, and so on and so forth. With this, they were actually writing code and stuff that was actually producing something that told a story and was able to provide the health of the business. I think that if I would have had more time and a little bit of a larger audience, I think that Flying Logic can be a real-time pulse setter to a business. I think that, you know, with the confidence spinners that you have there, they can be going to, you know, all the time. Sometimes once in a while, customers are complaining about this. You can take different things. You know, we solve the issues, but you can always categorize issues and kind of understand that as like, okay, are they complaining about access? Are they complaining about response time or something like that of the site? What is it our customers are complaining about? And in having that, you would be able to better understand your complex system that you have, because you have each person is its own input. So every person is its own experience. So it's a variable that comes into the system. There's only so many things you can control. So it's a matter of understanding how it is what you have that's controllable is impacting all those different customers throughout the various points in their journey.
And I know this
So
is gonna sound like asking you to make a pitch, but I mean, why would you choose Flying Logic over other diagramming tools? I mean, there's a lot of them out there. What made it different for you?
the simplicity of it, it doesn't need a ton of bells and whistles. It needs to tell me the story of what's going on, and then I like that. I like um the customization, the ease of customization to it. You know, it if case in point, I had one side of the business that had a bunch of different journeys, subsystems, different names and stuff, right? And then another one that was another side of the business. It was just a matter of copying and pasting, cloning or duplicating that, and it was right there again. And now it's just a matter of going back in and modifying it and tweaking a little bit here and there. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed. I've only scratched the surface of the tool that you have because, to be honest with you, sir, I didn't even get into some of the examples. I mean, my God, the fact that you can do a strategy and tactic map, what other kind of a business has that? I haven't seen any business. And if they do, they got it hid away under lock and key, and they don't tell anybody, because even the people that come in after and they rotate and like, hey, this is where we're going, they don't see it. It changes over and over. And it's like having something like that in the tools that you provide, I think it really, it puts all the different things that you would need at your fingertips. And so it's not just a one trick pony tool kind of a thing. You have all the different things there. And then I like the fact that, you were like, hey, we don't have a goal tree. Okay, that's easy. I can build that and add that, and here's a goal tree now. It's like those are things that can be added to it that I feel that made it good, as well as I just thought the usability of it was good. And and the bonus that you throw into it, which is kind of like the little hidden gem that I think is the project management side of it.
Yeah.
That project management graph that you have, that if you're not thinking about it, you're just thinking about a diagram, and you're like, oh no. So now that we're here, now we can make this into a project. And it totally blows you away of what it is. And again, the fact that it can partner with Microsoft Project, which I'm not too familiar with on that, but the fact that you can take it and you can have it interact with all your different data sets that you already have in place and leverage that information that your people today are extracting to Excel spreadsheets and trying to go line by line to figure out is completely different.
I've always said that Flying Logic is kind of like Flying Logic is like kind of like a spreadsheet turned inside out, because in a spreadsheet you have this grid of cells with these formulas behind them, and Excel lets you show lines connecting the cells as to what cells depend on what. But ultimately, it's a directed acyclic graph, which is what Flying Logic does. But Flying Logic turns that inside out, and the cells are the entities, and then you see the formulas that connect them directly as lines. And so that's kind of a way of looking at things in a different way. That in some ways is equivalent, but in some ways it's just it shows you a lot more of what's important about your model, your situation. You say you only scratch the surface, but I think you've gone a lot deeper than a lot of users do, because you've gotten into scripting, and you've done basically integration of external data using Flying Logic, and you've worked with the project management stuff, and that's stuff that is fairly advanced. And so I'd say that you're definitely in the advanced category there.
Well, thanks.
So now that you've kind of separated from Citigroup, what are you thinking of doing with yourself, and what kind of thing, what ideally would you like to see yourself doing?
That is a good question, because I've been looking at that and I'm thinking, do I want to go back into doing what somebody else wants me to do? I've been looking at it over the time. Believe it or not, it's crazy. You have time, and so you listen and you read things. Jocko Willink, I've read his I've read his book or his audio book of extreme ownership and thinking about that. And that I felt is kind of what empowered me a bit in Citi to reach outside of the people that I had, because I mean, honestly, I was told, I was explaining this stuff to my manager and stuff. And they said, well, that looks really good and everything, but is this a hill you want to die on? And I'm kind of like, wow, that's really kind of a bad way of thinking about, is this really I mean, innovation, new ideas, like we should take them to the nth degree, to try them before you throw it out, baby with the bathwater kind of thing. It's just, you were willing to discard it. And so I felt that helped me a little bit, but it kind of didn't get everything done. And so now I'm kind of figuring like, okay, here I am. They didn't want to hear it, or they weren't up to bringing it in, so to speak. I mean, it's interesting because
my understanding is they kind of hired you to kind of do this, and then in some ways you felt like you were blocked. Is that, from actually doing it? Is that?
Yeah. I was hired in as a senior process engineer, and then over the time, as the bank went on, we kind of got kicked around and moved around, and so work gets shifted and stuff of what you're looking at and what you're doing. And then when you're over there in this new space and people at the top start peeling off and start leaving, now you're with a bunch of people who have been at the bank or been at the corporation, for 20 years or whatnot. And they
bureaucracy.
They don't know any different. You know what I mean? And so now here it is. I'm a guy on the outside coming, go figure. I'm a guy on the outside coming in, trying to show a different way or have a different idea of something. And it goes against the way that they've been doing it for so long. Even though the funny thing is, I would talk to colleagues and stuff, and they would tell me, yeah, we do all this work and find all of these pain points, but we really don't solve anything.
Yeah, and that's a problem in bigger organizations. And I feel like in some ways, as a consultant, I want to work more with people who have enough power over their organizations, say entrepreneurs between 10 and 100 employees, where they are the boss.
Yes.
And they can hire, fire, redirect the whole organization. So if they really want to actually create, big change, big growth, they are the ones empowered to do it. And it's not going to come from below, even if there's some people with good ideas from below. But what I've seen is, Ellie Goldratt worked with a lot of people who were the entrepreneurs who had the ability to create change. He worked with some fairly large organizations too. And of course, people like Philip Maris and so on are working with some fairly large organizations. And they're not necessarily working from the top, but they at least are empowered within those areas to create change. And I think, if unless you have that kind of mandate going in and that kind of support, you're going to come up with some great ideas, but they're going to get dropped on the floor in favor of the inertia that's already in the organization.
Yeah, I would definitely so back to your question of where I would like. Well, that is, I think doing what you're talking about, working with companies, 10 to 100 people, even 1,000 people, then getting to that level and looking at it and working with them to help build their business, give them that goal. What is your goal? What are the three things? What's the mean, the method, and the motivation behind you getting to that goal? And just have open conversations with people to get them to answer those questions. I don't think businesses take enough time to slow down and just take a little bit of time to slow down and think about where you're going. Where do you want to be in 6 months? Okay, now great, 2 years, and then and then at the longest, a 5-year plan, but always having something out there to reach for, and I think that's something that I want to help companies get to learn how to see it. I'm not, and then work with people that are like-minded in this work in order to get people there. Because I think, and the craziness that's going on today with everything, we need to just slow down a little bit and just think about what's going on and be able to say, is this in track with where I want to go as a company, or are we getting off the path, or whatever it is, just to set that. And that's the kind of thing that I like. I feel that all the way back from when I was in the military, like I said, when people listened to us and we were empowered to make the change, and the changes that we made, that were made because we listened to the people on the floor, took it down from 82 days down to 3 days.
Yeah,
Why?
that's bigger
Because
than
we
10x.
stopped what we were doing and we just slowed down and listened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a book I recently read. I was given a preprint of it at a mastermind I went to. It's called I have it here. It's called 10x is using the 2x by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. And it's a great book. I recommend it because it talks about how the kinds of things you're talking about, identifying the actual 20% of what you're doing that's giving you 80% of the result, and then getting rid of the 80%, being willing to let go of that 80%, all that waste, all that, and really manage the bottleneck in your life, identify it over and over again and improve it, lets you, whatever your organization is doing or whatever your, whether it's your personal life or your organization, so on, lets you level up and then level up and level up. But you have to actually be able to create change. And we can all create change within our individual lives, but the organizations we work with, that may or may not be true depending on how they're structured. But the most dramatic examples that I've ever seen and that this book talks about are people where it's either individuals or entrepreneurs who had a lot of control over their company, and then became willing to actually deal with the pushback of, say, identifying the most profitable 5% of their business and then getting rid of the other 95% of their business, because that 5% becomes the 100%, and then they can grow that in ways that their competitors can't touch. And that's constraints right there. That's constraints management. This is also something that Alex Hormozy has talked about. Are you familiar with him at all?
Yes.
Yeah, he's an entrepreneur and investor, and he's talked about constraints management a lot. He doesn't talk about the details of it much, but that's kind of what you and I do. Is figuring out how to manage organizations or any kind of system such that it can really level up, and that's what excites me about the field we're in. So I'm hoping and working to build a bigger and bigger community of people who are people who coach and instruct and think this way, so that we can create better and better change in the world. And definitely feels like you've been kind of through the school of hard knocks and you're ready to graduate and get out there and do some amazing things.
Yeah, I've since recent events, I've been in contact with Philip Morris. I've been in contact with Rami Goldratt. Really just Remy Goldratt, to really just introduce myself a little bit and say, hey, I'm interested in this, but then also trying to find people in the States that do this type of work or that understand it. And I have to say that I was very surprised at how few people have heard of TOC over here.
Yeah,
that I've found.
TOC has always had a marketing problem, if you ask me. And I think a lot of people hear even the word constraints and their eyes glaze over. It sounds mathematical. It sounds cold. And,
in theory of, and so people are like, well, it's a theory, and it's like, okay, well, you need to understand the word. And that's something else too that I've noticed is people do not take the time to understand the words that they speak. So if I say theory of constraints, what does that mean? Well, that's a theory. It means that it's always changing. You cannot lock it down, and the constraint is always moving. So, I mean, I understand it. It's like every person is a variable, so every constraint is always going to be different, whether it is. And so,
my understanding of the word theory might be a bit different. I mean, in the hard sciences, the word theory, when you think about the theory of gravity, okay, well, does that mean it's a hunch? Well, no, it's not a hunch of gravity. It's a theory, and a theory is a very strong kind of locked down term in hard sciences. It basically means a body of knowledge that's been so well established that it lets you make reliable predictions about things. And so the idea of having a theory of constraints basically is if you have this theory and you have a system, it has certain constraints, you can use that theory to predict that, if you change certain things, certain outcomes will follow. And I think that's more what was meant by that. But, because you theory of gravity, you have straight, and of course things like, well, okay, getting off on a tangent for a moment here, like string theory. The problem with string theory is it's not testable. because it's a beautiful theory, but some people think that it doesn't even, but we have, nuclear theory, quantum theory, things like that. These are very tested,
Yes.
and I think the theory of constraints kind of falls into that kind of group of ideas that Ellie Goldratt, being a physicist himself, was thinking of when he
Right.
called it that. I think, unfortunately, from a marketing perspective, it's a terrible name.
I think so too. It is what it is, right? I mean, he calls it what it is, and it's just, to your point, it's just a bad thing because people don't understand it. They don't take the time. And but I think about it, Wolf, and I have to say that I look at people in the world of process improvement today who are, oh, I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt. Okay, well, what do you know about theory of constraints? What's that? What do you know about constraint management? What's that? And so they know a lot about process maps, 5 whys, ARACI, doing these type of things, mapping out the process, time studies, things like that. Well, that's good, but if you don't know what you're supposed to be changing, then how do you know that what you're making the improvements to and spending any time working on is going to make an improvement downstream? Is it going to increase your throughput or not?
Yep.
And the thing that always catches me is people complain that they don't have enough time to work on the things and to make the things better. But the problem is the time that they're spending on working what they're working on is not the right thing. Yep. Half the time,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Ellie who said it first, but the way I formulate it is, all improvement requires change, but not all change is improvement. So learning as the big three questions, what to change, and how to cause the change that actually ends up as improvement. That's the core of this, and that's what these techniques are all centered around. And then, of course, Flying Logic is a tool that I think in many ways is like a word processor. It doesn't turn you into a writer. But it supports your writing or a spreadsheet. It doesn't turn you into an accountant, but it supports your accounting. Flying Logic supports your thinking. You have to, you don't have to, use a word processor to be a writer. You don't have to use Flying Logic to think well, but you have to learn how to think well first of all, and then you can you can use tools that support that.
And I think that the documentation that you provide with Flying Logic in regards to thinking with Flying Logic is a very good, helpful tool for people that are coming in off the street not knowing anything about Flying Logic. You have to have a thinking mindset in order to understand and use it for you to maximize or for you to get the most out of it. I think that you have to understand that it requires some thinking. The program's not going to tell you what to do, but it helps put your thoughts on paper so that you can better organize them and understand them in a more clear and concise and precise fashion.
Yep. Yeah. And I always say that, you can learn Flying Logic like as an individual sitting in a bedroom or a cubicle by yourself, but it really shines when you start to use these diagrams to communicate with other people, to get on the same page with them. And that's when you realize that, wow, this is where the power really lies here, is helping people understand a shared reality so they can change it for the better. And so it's first and foremost a communication tool. It's something you use to communicate with yourself, but then if you don't use it to communicate with other people as well in your organization, with the stakeholders or whatever, then you're leaving so much money on the table.
I've seen a lot where people will go into meetings to talk about a project, and whether it's an agile project or whatever, and there are deliverables, and this person has to do this and that, and so on and so forth, and timelines, and when they're going to have it done by, and whatever. And when I've looked at it, I'm like, okay, it's just an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of lines on it with a bunch of names and who's doing what. I'm like, but there's no real order to this. How do I know that I'm working on the right thing? Or how do I know that this line item here that you've identified is actually the predecessor to something that's 6 lines down that we're not working on, or we don't plan on working on for another 3 months? How do you know that what you're working on is in order? And that was what I thought was lacking from the way we were looking at things and what I was hearing, and how meetings were run. People would talk about things, and then people would come up with conditions. Well, what about this scenario with a customer? How would we handle that? And I'm thinking like, man, you guys are just talking about this on a phone call. you have no documentation of how the system today works in that experience. Like, so there has to be a large map somewhere of how these different things are handled. And that was something that I thought of what Flying Logic could do, is it could basically say, okay, all these different conditions, these are the issues that customers are facing at login, right? And then what have we done to solve that? And
Right.
so on and so forth. And it's like that can help you realize that, are you working on something that's trivial, or are you working on something that's really detrimental to the system that we haven't identified yet? You know, just because 6 people don't like something doesn't mean we're going to go change up the whole way we do things.
Yep.
When you have 600,000 coming in every month.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about, Flying Logic and the theory of constraints thinking process is the kind of the tree and diagram tools.
Yes.
And how they relate to, say, for example, Dave Snowden's Kinevin framework, which I think you're familiar with, right? And Flying Logic is useful in a number of those domains. I mean, in the simple domain, when you have a simple problem, mostly you need to document and to kind of tweak existing processes, but mostly document and make sure that knowledge promulgates the organization. You can use Flying Logic for process maps or whatever that help you do that help you create that documentation. And then when you're in a complicated domain, where cause and effect isn't exactly known, but it's knowable, and that's very commonly where it's used. You can basically figure out, like current reality tree, what is the root cause here, and then how do we create a solution that actually affects the actual goal of the organization. And then when you're in the complex domain, you need to do a lot of experimentation. And so brainstorming possible chains of cause and effect, and then inventing, short-lived experiments, kind of fail-fast experiments. You can use Flying Logic to create those kinds of what-if diagrams. And you can't do much with it in the chaotic domain, because that's just basically your pants are on fire and you have to get out of it. But yeah, so it's the kind of thing where I see that helping people understand, first of all, even before they do a goal tree, because nothing is one size fits all. Flying Logic isn't one size fits all. It doesn't fit the chaotic idea. But even understanding what kind of problems you're facing, and having a tool like the Kinevin framework to kind of sense make and figure out, and then figure out, okay, is the theory of constraints the right tool for this? Is Flying Logic the right tool for this? Having that knowledge up front, I think, and being able to, these are things we should be teaching kids in school. I mean, if you ask me, even the fact that people don't know the difference between, complicated and complex, where complicated is, it's, cause and effect is knowable, but not necessarily known. And you can hire experts or figure out, to got to figure out what the true cause and effect is. And complex, where you're never going to know except in retrospect. You're going to try things and see what works, and then eventually you get to know the system. But it's where you have to explore. And those two, just that distinction itself, most people don't have that in their heads, and that's so vitally important.
Yes. Something I noticed is, so, when I came out of the military, I went right into financial services working at Citi, and I was a contractor there. And so, talk about a fish out of water. I didn't know any, and it was acronym Citi over there too. So acronyms and this and that.
I have a son who's about to go into the Air Force, and he's already spouting acronyms.
Right. Yeah. So so the military had acronyms, but then I left there and I went over to Citi and to learn that. So I went from aviation and aerospace and working there and fixing that and running that program, to then going into finance, and completely different. But I knew that it was just a process, and I felt that was a good thing. Is I was not soured or tainted by any of that. I didn't know it, so it was a matter of learning it and questioning things. And so I feel that was something that helped me, is to understand that, to get a good look around the bank, but also to understand that it takes a person at least 9 months to figure out, to get a good bearing on what's going on in the business. And then to try to change anything is just really hard, right? Because it takes you 9 months to figure out what you're doing. And then you get into it and you're so busy in doing what you're doing that you don't realize that the inefficiencies that are, in the business. So I think that is what happens, is people don't have that objective view to step back and look at it. And again, I go back to what I was looking at Jocko is like, hey, I had to slow down and step back and look up and out and say, what is it that we're doing here? And really understand, okay, when I finish this project or I fix this one issue, then what? What's next? And really understanding that. And I feel that with Flying Logic, it allowed me to see that in the in that complex world that you don't have on an Excel spreadsheet, because that was the thing. We were looking at everything. We would have all the issues from Jira, and then we'd export them to an Excel spreadsheet, and then people would just work off of an Excel spreadsheet, like trying to remedy all these things. And it was just like, a lot of them were subjective complaints, customer feels, customer doesn't like this. It's like, okay, but we can't fix everything and you can't make everybody happy. So it was trying to find like I've said, the critical root cause, or that one thing that would kind of have that ripple effect. And unfortunately, when you were looking at everything via Excel spreadsheets, you have no idea. Because I would tell people, and so I would take that Excel spreadsheet and I would explain to them, I'd say, look, all you're doing is we're looking at the same thing, just in a different perspective. Because that was the thing I had to explain, is perspective. I'm not changing the information. We're just changing the perspective in which you're looking at it.
Yep.
And so
that's huge.
Once they understood that, I said, look, here it is. We would put it on an Excel spreadsheet, the pain, the root cause, or the reason why it happened, and then why that happened. I said, now I took that and I just flipped those vertically on Flying Logic. And then I just said, okay, what came first? And sometimes people had a problem with it. So I just put up a blank entity, which was, okay, here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the end of the journey. Now, where does this thing fall? And it helped them get them in order. And then once they saw it, they were able to identify through this whole thing what the critical root cause was. I'm like, okay, so we don't need to look at these 10 things and keep trying to go after people to fix 10 things. We just need to focus on this one.
Right. Yeah. Most of the changes you can make never matter. So why do you bother?
They don't. There's only one thing that's causing it. Everything else is an effect.
So this has been a great conversation, and I'm sure it's not going to be the last that we have. And so
I hope not.
So if people want to reach out to you, we'll put whatever links you like in the show notes. But you're on LinkedIn, I take it, at least.
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn. I have a profile there, like I said. Yeah, I'm available for other people, like-minded folks to whether it's to work or to ideate or whatever. I just think that, like I've said, the world's kind of in a crazy spot right now. And I think Flying Logic can help people slow down and think about it. And, however it would, I read Bill Detmer's work. I have his green book. I haven't taken his class, but I've still sat through. I feel that by reading the book and watching his videos and stuff and being in the know and kind of what it is, I have a pretty good idea. I would love to partner with any of those guys to do any of the work that they do. Lisa's, I've read her book.
I'm hoping to have several of these people on for interviews on this channel soon. Yeah. So, definitely, any TOC professionals or, kind of change makers that you admire or you're familiar that please, let them know I'm here, because I want to make this like the first of a series of interviews. I've been interviewed by a couple of them themselves. I was interviewed a while back by Clark Ching. I'd like to have him on this channel and talk about that, talk about what he does. And so, this is a conversation that really has to happen, and it's starting here. But my goal is to help people think better, and in kind of the largest sense that means, and whether that's businesses or individuals or whatever, there's so much bad thinking in the world that, people like you and me, we're kind of standing against and standing for people all the way from children up to adults learning how to think well. And that doesn't mean denying emotions, but that means integrating them. So,
Yeah.
I think we're on the same page there, and I think there's a community of people that has been kind of around for a while, but they're really going to start emerging now, I think, and become more of a force and more of a voice, and that's what I want to start helping to gather here.
Sure.
Jim Dowling, thank you so much for joining me here. And like I said, I know we're going to be talking again soon. And thanks for your time.
Sure. Thank you very much, Wolf. I've appreciated it. And like I said, I've really enjoyed the tool that you've built. I look forward to the updates that you're going to make to it. And I appreciate you taking the input from the users and looking to see, again, how can this tool be made to be more usable and better for the people that need it. So I think it's a great tool, and I look forward to your next update with it.
Excellent. Yeah, it's coming soon.